125 years ago, we date the beginning of Alsco, and that really relates to the purchase by G.A. Steiner of a towel route in Lincoln, Nebraska.
It was a simple operation. He just kept the clean towels on one arm and delivered them to the shopkeepers, the customers, and then he gathered up their soiled towels and put them on the other arm, keeping them separate. Within a very short period of time, Mr. Johnson didn't really want to be involved anymore, and he offered to sell it to George Steiner, and he paid $25.80 or something like that. He had a younger brother, Frank, 2 years younger, and after a period of time running this route, he got Frank to help him, and they became equal partners. Lincoln was a growing community, at least at that time, and so there were more customers or potential ones, and the business grew, and they had to move from just delivering towels on their arms to having a cart.
It almost reads like they had a formula for developing a business. You'd go and you'd sell, and then you'd deliver in a handcart. And then eventually the handcart became too small, and you replaced it with a horse-drawn wagon.
1895, my great-grandfather George moved to Salt Lake City, but the reason was there was a depression, essentially, in Nebraska. The corn prices would be down, and people would have less money to spend, and the shopkeepers would go from having a clean roller towel every day to maybe one every 3 days or once a week, so there's a lot less business. He heard from a college friend who had moved to Salt Lake City that things were pretty good in Salt Lake.
He arrived in a snowstorm on a Saturday, and then Monday he went to work. And that was the day where he crossed the street in front of his rooming house, went into the Rigby Brothers market, and signed them up as his first customer, and they remained a customer until they went out of business when the Rigby brothers both died at 53 years later.
He had started with roller towels, and then he saw that there were shopkeepers who were wearing aprons, and he thought to offer them an apron service, and he bought some material, a little mercantile shop, and sewed these aprons.
There were a lot of little things that went well that could have ended Alsco in its infancy. One of them that everybody remembers is when the newsboy tips over his handcart, and all of those clean towels go into the mud, and he has to go and convince the laundry to rewash it all on credit because he couldn't pay them to rewash it otherwise.
Within a short time, they needed to have the reliability of their own plant, and they found a location that's very close to Symphony Hall now in Salt Lake.
First plant American Linen built had about $1,200 worth of equipment in it, which was made up of 2 wooden washers, a small boiler, 2 wooden tumblers, a small ironer, and a small body press.
The first plant in its first year produced revenue of $21,000.
Frank eventually went up to St. Paul, Minnesota, and basically the Minneapolis area, started a plant up there. It's been a real stronghold for the linen supply business ever since. And George expanded into Ogden. But their vision from those early days was to move across the whole, they wanted to be a national company. They wanted to move across the whole country.
They knew they could do it. They knew they could expand. They knew they could provide service, provide jobs, grow the company, and it would have been unnatural for these people, for these entrepreneurs, not to do it.
About the time World War I was getting started, the roller towel business was under pressure.
You talk about a cloth roller that what it was a towel that was sewn into a loop, and it just went on a little bar in a restroom, and people dry their hands, and eventually the towel got dirty and didn't necessarily get changed.
So the roller towels were not really hygienic. It was a common towel. The towel would be used by more than one person.
About that time, paper began to be used, and essentially, initially it was not very pleasant to dry your hands with, but they had eventually improved it so it was a pretty acceptable substitute.
So George put his mind to a solution to this because he didn't want to lose that kind of business, and he eventually ended up having the idea for the continuous towel cabinet.
Frank, my grandfather, was born in 1897. And then he came to work for the company after he got out of college at the University of Pennsylvania. And initially, he was given the assignment of developing the continuous towel cabinet.
He took hold of the continuous towel idea and really developed it. Came up with a practical product, was able to get it manufactured.
His business model was that they'd sell a cabinet and then demand a royalty of $1 a year per cabinet from the local supplier, and it caught on.
The continuous towel was really quite a moneymaker for the company. One, it opened up a worldwide industry because it was a product that could be used in any restroom, any restaurant, any work area that could be used throughout the entire world. It was a worldwide product.
He traveled constantly, carried these heavy cabinets. He had several of them, samples, and sold them all over the United States. He believed a lot in what the company was doing. He believed in the towel cabinet, he believed in expansion, he believed in the linen supply business, and that was infectious.
It was really the continuous towel cabinet that provided the next step up to a new level for Alsco. That success never wore off.
FG was a little older, and he was really out there as a leader. He attracted a lot of great people to our company just because of his personality.
The descendants of FM, Frank, the GA's brother, did not like a couple of decisions that my grandfather, Frank, had made, one of which was to enter the paper manufacturing business.
It's a slow start often, and sometimes the returns were not immediate.
The other complaint they had was that Frank wanted to grow the business internationally.
And there was a great controversy at the time within the company because Frank was so eager to expand Steiner Company and look at paper and do cabinets and do soap dispensers and develop those sort of things.
Eventually, in 1958, they decided to split the business. Dividing the business, the Minneapolis side got 22 plants, and then our side got 18, mostly in the West. We also got the towel cabinet business. It was called Steiner Company. That had been FG's baby. He developed it, and his heart was in it, and he believed in the growth of that part of the business. And the other side were not that interested in the towel cabinet business.
The foreign expansion was largely accomplished by FG, my grandfather. He was the one with wanderlust. He was the one who loved to go to Brazil, and so he started a business there.
The first big account was the Keybone. There's an ice cream vendor, and we got to supply all of these little ice cream cart vendors on the beaches in white uniforms.
Outside the United States, we had to develop systems for each of the world markets we were operating in to produce a plant that was economical to build, economical to equip, and operate within the needs of the local market.
South Africa was enormously successful and probably the most successful operations that we had overseas.
My father, RR, he came into the business right after World War II. And that was a time of great expansion. And it was right after the split, or at the time of the split, really. And both sides were, as rapidly as they could, staking claim to cities in which to operate all across the country.
What RR did was he built on those businesses and made things much bigger, much more successful, more profitable. My dad used to say that FG couldn't read a financial statement to save his life. I don't know that that's true, but my dad sure could. And he was very close with the numbers. He reviewed everything very closely. And he was a tough manager. He demanded a lot from people.
I liked to duck hunt, and so did Mr. Steiner. And we used to go duck hunting together. And the biggest problem I had with him, you'd be in a blind with him for 5 or 6 hours, and all he wanted to do was talk about business and how much volume you did here and there. And I said, Mr. Steiner, why don't you come down to the plant where I have the books so we can go look at them, and let's talk about something else.
Richard R. Steiner, who was Mr. Steiner to all of us, took over the reins of the company in the late 1950s. Every general manager would tell you that this was a man who knew the business through and through. If your branch was due for a visit from Mr. Steiner, you knew it was time for a major branch cleanup, and a little fresh paint wouldn't hurt either.
Mr. Steiner was a very astute businessman, and he listened well when you were talking to him.
He didn't tolerate BS very well.
The thing he did, I think, that was most successful is he set the bar pretty high for people. And then he stepped back and said, okay, that's what the goal is, now do it.
Now, one thing he brought to the company that hadn't arrived with my great-grandfather or my grandfather was the discipline of making a profit. That was a huge contribution. I think it made it a serious, modern enterprise.
A 125 years ago, the founders of our company, George and Frank, visualized the company, but it'd be really interesting if we could go back and talk to them and see if they really understood how special this company would become.
The future of Alsco is very bright. It's an exciting place to work. The company is financially very strong. We continue to make investments domestically as well as internationally. We have over 150 plants worldwide. We're in 14 countries.
It has been a family and remains a family business. I mean, obviously one of the first things that GA did was he brought his brother in and gave him half of the equity of the company. My brother and I are fourth generation in the business, which is rare.
We have great people around us and throughout the organization. And we have these great people run the business the same way George had his people do it, and that we leave everybody alone to kind of run their own operation like it's their own business.
What does Alsco do for me? It gave me a sense of being worth something. It gave me a sense of being connected to something. I was treated exceptionally well by the corporation. They boosted my confidence in myself by giving me a lot of responsibility. It was an experience that was a lifetime to me and very worthwhile. With 125 years of experience that this company has, having been through recessions, depressions, world wars, separate wars in other countries, they've survived pretty well. I don't see anything but success ahead for this company, not only in the next 5 or 10 years, but for maybe another 125 years.